Loss has a sound when it settles into a man's bones. For Kyle Patterson, it sounded like rain ticking against rusted steel, a steady reminder of everything that had slipped beyond his grasp. He was 52, sleeping curled in the back of a battered muscle car he'd bought with his last $300, parked behind a forgotten garage where the city rarely looked. The divorce had taken his house, his shop, and worst of all, his place in his daughter's life. Paperwork had done it neatly, efficiently, without malice or mercy. Kyle had signed where they told him to sign. He told himself it was temporary, that men like him had survived worse, but nights stretched long when pride was all he had left. He stared through fogged glass at distant streetlights, imagining normal lives unfolding 2 blocks away. He had once been a respected mechanic, the kind neighbors trusted with family cars and late-night breakdowns. Then the economy shifted, mistakes compounded, and reputation bled out faster than oil from a cracked pan. Now his world fit into a duffel bag and a photograph of his daughter, Iris, smiling in a garage years ago. He rubbed his hands, still scarred, still strong, and wondered how they could be so capable and yet so powerless. The rain eased. The car creaked. Kyle breathed and waited for morning because waiting was all he knew how to do anymore. Morning brought routine and restraint. Kyle washed up at a gas station sink, bought coffee with coins, and returned to the garage to keep his mind busy. Earl, the elderly owner, let him stay quietly and sometimes brought day-old donuts, never asking questions. A former coworker dropped off groceries when pride would have preferred hunger. Work, even unpaid, was a mercy. That day, Kyle decided to clean the car that sheltered him. The body was rough, the interior torn, but the bones were straight, something solid beneath neglect. He moved slowly, methodically, letting muscle memory lead. When he opened the trunk, years of junk spilled out, wrappers, brittle carpet, forgotten odds and ends. As he lifted the mat, his instincts stirred. A seam didn't belong. He pressed, listened, and felt a give where there shouldn't have been one. The panel came loose with a tired sigh, revealing a hidden compartment and a weathered leather portfolio heavy in his hands. Kyle's heart began to thud. Inside were photographs, yellowed papers, seals, signatures, racing images of this very car crossing finish lines, a woman beside it holding a trophy with fierce pride. He checked numbers twice, then a third time. The VIN matched. He sat back hard, breath shallow, the garage suddenly too small for the possibility opening in front of him. Hope flickered, dangerous, fragile, but unmistakably alive. Sleep refused him that night. The portfolio lay inches away, proof against the fear that desperation invents miracles. At dawn, Kyle walked to the public library and fed the computer hours he couldn't afford. The name surfaced. A pioneering driver from the early 70s, a rare woman who built engines and beat men on mountain routes. Clippings confirmed a grueling rally win, then silence. The trail ended with an obituary that mentioned grit without applause. Back at the garage, Kyle searched again and found more. An envelope with a corporate letterhead, technical language, signatures that made his hands shake. The car wasn't just raced. It was a factory prototype, one of a kind, loaned for evaluation and promotion. Earl warned him to stay quiet. Value attracts predators. Authentication mattered. Desperation ruins deals. Kyle listened. He had learned that lesson the hard way. Days blurred into weeks as he cleaned, cataloged, and studied every inch, finding a diary hidden with care. The entries were spare, fierce, and human, victories hard-won, doors closed without explanation, fatigue that comes from proving yourself again and again. The final pages were gentler, almost tender, as if the writer knew the future would need guidance. Kyle felt seen by a woman gone 50 years. He wasn't chasing money anymore, he was holding a responsibility. The car had been preserved for someone who would understand. Against the odds, that someone was him. Work became purpose. Earl traded tools and space for sweat, and Kyle earned every drawer he opened. He rebuilt the engine piece by piece, matching modifications to contracts, coaxing life back into metal that remembered speed. Friends pitched in without fanfare. The motor roared one gray afternoon, deep and sure, and the sound echoed through the rafters like a promise kept. Another discovery followed, a tarnished plate commemorating the rally win, small but undeniable. Evidence stacked into certainty. A former boss offered weekend work, cash in hand, pride swallowed for progress. The authentication fund grew coin by coin. Then, tucked deeper than before, Kyle found a second compartment and a canvas bag sealed by time. Inside lay stacks of old bills, racing winnings paid in cash, saved for a future that never arrived. $40,000 sat there, immediate freedom by any measure. Kyle felt the pull of it like gravity. Rent, food, dignity solved. But the note beneath the money was brief and firm: use it wisely. Earl's counsel steadied him. Do it right, wait for papered money, clean and explainable. Kyle resealed the bag and hid it again. That night, temptation whispered, but wisdom answered. The difference between survival and redemption, he realized, is patience guided by purpose. The day of inspection arrived sharp and cold. The expert worked without drama, checking stamps, components, signatures, provenance. Hours passed. Kyle's nerves frayed. When the verdict came, it landed with weight and grace. Genuine, significant, rare. Conservative estimates climbed into 6 figures, higher with restoration. The certificate felt unreal in Kyle's hands, embossed proof that his faith had not been foolish. Introductions followed, security cautions, timelines that finally had edges. That evening, Kyle called Iris. They spoke carefully, rebuilding trust syllable by syllable. He told her about the woman who raced and won, about preserving stories the world tried to forget. Iris listened, then asked to see the car. The request caught in his chest like sunlight. He said yes. Winter deepened, but work warmed him. Panels straightened, rust retreated, and the garage became a place of order again. Kyle framed the letter from the diary where he could read it when his hands ached. It reminded him why haste would betray them both. Redemption isn't a sprint, it's a long, honest rebuild. The auction came with lights and murmurs, paddles lifting on trust as much as metal. The story traveled with the car this time, documented, undeniable. When the hammer fell, the number changed Kyle's life. He didn't cheer, he exhaled. Contracts closed cleanly, debts were paid. An apartment followed, then steady work, then dinners where laughter returned. Kyle set aside funds for Iris's schooling without spectacle. He donated materials to ensure the driver's legacy lived beyond a line item, beyond a price. The cash hidden for decades was finally handled properly, folded into the story rather than tearing it apart. On quiet evenings, Kyle visited the empty garage and listened to echoes, grateful. He had not sold his way out of pain. He had worked his way through it. The car had saved him, yes, but only because he chose not to let desperation steer. Time did not rush to reward Kyle Patterson, it tested him instead. Months after the auction, he learned that rebuilding a life is quieter than losing one. There were no crowds when he reopened a small garage on the edge of town, just a single bay, second-hand tools, and his name painted carefully on the door. Customers came slowly at first, drawn by word of mouth rather than spectacle. Kyle worked the way he always had, methodical, honest, refusing shortcuts even when money was tight again. What mattered most, though, happened beyond the shop. Iris began visiting on weekends, tentative at first, then comfortable, rolling up her sleeves like she used to. They talked while working, about mistakes, about resentment, about the long silence that had almost cost them each other. Kyle listened more than he spoke, understanding that trust isn't reclaimed with explanations but with consistency. He kept the framed letter from the racer on the shop wall, not as inspiration but as accountability. It reminded him that legacy is fragile and that dignity survives only when actions match intention. Slowly, Kyle stopped measuring his worth by what he had lost or gained. He measured it by mornings he looked forward to, by work done right, and by a daughter